Doctors were helping him learn to be safe. He just nodded and asked if I brought his Nintendo Switch. He didn't ask about Daniela or Ruby, or even seem to notice that his mom had been crying. The therapist tried to get him to talk about his feelings, but he just kept asking about video games. After the visit, the neurologist wanted to run brain scans to rule out any investigation. We spent 6 hours at the hospital, talking about him on his face and other tests like his head. He laid perfectly still in the machines without complaining, which the tech said was unusual for kids his age. No 7-year-old needed attention, or at least not straight assurance. The walker just followed instructions on his main road. The whole time it felt like something wrong that could be fixed with surgery.
James entering this gauntlet match, looking to go the distance.
The results came back 2 days later. Dr. Dorothy called us into some research. Every single scan showed a normal 7-year-old brain with no tumors, lesions, or anything that could explain Walker's behavior. Dr. Dorothy pulls up the image of the computer and pointed to different areas of the brain, just like Walker, differences in how their brains work. Parts that control
mental or physical
functions differently, even though they appeared normal. He said this was typical for children with these types of behavioral issues, and meant we were dealing with something that couldn't be fixed with surgery. That night, Danielle woke up screaming 3 times, and when I went to comfort her, she was soaking wet and wetting bedding. She hadn't had it, but now was having a scream for Walker at his face. During the day, she was really kept Ruby around him, and fast near her. She started hiding behind furniture. I looked at the phone, and kept it scared for a chance. Miss Garcia thought I didn't know she made some calls to find someone who said how kids process. She got us an appointment with Natalie Stein, who works specifically with pre-teenage victims of abuse. They were in a therapy space with dolls and toys. Daniela spent whole hours just playing with dolls, while Natalie sat on the floor, pushing for the ball. Meanwhile, the insurance company started making things difficult about keeping Walker in psychiatric care. They sent a letter saying that since he was stable and following Google's environment, he didn't meet their criteria to continue coverage. Ms. Garcia had to file emergency paperwork to get letters from 3 different doctors explaining to Walker. They spent hours on the phone arguing with Detective Williams. They found a notebook hidden under his mattress filled with drawings of furniture, stick figures of various states of stress. There's also a list of kids in class and check marks. Williams just thinking she just doesn't like what the news by him. 2 days later, he went to Jake and he was directly involved, explaining the program and worked with children who have severe behavior, including those with needs. He said they could teach Walker to follow society, both sinful and they couldn't make him feel good. The Sunday was 2 hours for him. Kids typically stay 6 months to 2 years. During our weekly chemotherapy sessions, Ruby finally broke, with me keeping notes of strange things. He found red burn around his problems, convinced himself that he took Walker was just
meant to be pretty, but oh man, does it get the job done.
He was on his own legs outside the
another target attached to his head and neck area. He has to be careful. Oh my God. Just going. And here we go. Locked in. It's locked in. And here
that night, I grabbed the blanket.
Will it get counted? Yes. Not letting the submission attempt do any more damage here.
I couldn't see the team. I peek in to make sure she was still safe, still alive. The exhaustion was crushing, but I couldn't stop the constant check for the research. Ruby found me there, freezing, trying to convince me to stack to my bed, but I couldn't do so. Her second grade teacher told me to talk to me. She doesn't think she's a teacher looking back. Watch the other children's emotions and taking middle time. When kids cried on the playground, Walker would tap their back, but his baby gave way. When everyone laughed at something funny, Walker would our first support group meeting for parents of children with severe behavioral disorders. The meeting was in a church basement with about 12 other parents sitting in a circle of folding chairs. Everyone looked exhausted and defeated. One mom talked about her 10-year-old daughter, who'd been in residential treatment for 3 years after trying to poison her younger brother. A dad shared how his son was perfect at age 8 when they found him tortured. Another couple described years of therapy and medication trials with no real improvement in their child's lack of empathy. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone, but also confirmed what Dr. Dorsey had been trying to tell us. This wasn't something that would just go away with the right treatment. These families had been dealing with this for years, and would continue dealing with it for the rest of their lives. Their kids had learned to follow rules to avoid consequences, but never developed real feelings for others. The support group leader talked about grief, and how we needed to mourn the child we thought we had, while learning to parent the child we actually had. The hospital psychiatrist started Walker on medication the next morning. She called to explain it would help control his impulses, but warned us not to expect miracles. Pills could reduce the urges to hurt others. They couldn't create empathy that wasn't there. Walker took them without complaint, swallowing each dose while the nurse watched. 2 days later, we had our first supervised visit since his admission. Walker sat across from us in a small room with a therapist watching from a corner. He looked the same, but something in his eyes seemed even more empty than before. When I asked how he was doing, he listed off his daily schedule like reading from a script. Breakfast at 7, group therapy at 9, lunch at noon, more therapy, dinner, then bed. Ruby tried to hug him, but he stayed rigid in her arms. Then Walker mentioned he'd been thinking about Pepper. He said he was sorry she was gone. My heart jumped for a second until I asked if he understood why what he did was wrong. He tilted his head and recited exactly what the therapist must have told him. Hurting animals is against the rules and makes people sad. No real understanding, just memorized words. The therapist nodded like this was progress, but I felt sick. Meanwhile, Daniela had started seeing Natalie twice a week for trauma therapy. During one session, she drew our family's prey on stick figures holding names. Daniela was between us with a big smile, but Walker was a black tunic separated from the breastplate. He showed us the picture later and said this was actually healthy. Daniela was processing the separation to protect him. Understanding that distance from Walker kept her safe. She was learning to feel secure again.
Looks like he's got something in mind for ringside here. I like where this is going.
Learned therapy
This has the
hospital
possibility to completely
Then the
unravel
court
here.
date arrived for Walker's long-term placement. Ruby and I sat together in the courtroom, but it felt like we were miles apart. She kept twisting her wedding ring while I stared at the wood grain on the judge's bench. The prosecutor started by describing Walker as a dangerous outlaw, listing every reason to be in court. Each word felt like a knife, but they were all true. Our lawyer didn't see the fact, just asked for the most appropriate treatment. Dr. Dorsey was the He explained Walker's diagnosis on Sunday, describing the neurological differences that affected his ability to feel empathy. Recommended long-term residential treatment with intensive behavioral therapy. When asked directly, he stated that home placement would put Daniela at complete risk of serious harm. His words were careful but clear. Walker couldn't safely live with his sister. The judge asked to hear from Walker himself via video link from the hospital. Walker appeared on the screen wearing a hospital shirt, sitting perfectly still. The judge asked simple questions. Did he understand why he was there? Because I broke the rules. Did he understand he hurt his sister? Yes. Did he feel bad about it? The doctors say I should. Every answer was flat. When asked if he wanted to just shrugged. The judge reviewed all the reports for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. Finally, she looked up and announced her decision. Walker would be placed at Pine Ridge Residential Treatment Center, a specialized facility 2 hours away. He had supervised visits twice a week and family therapy once a week. The placement would be reviewed every 6 months, but she warned us to prepare for a long-term arrangement. Ruby started crying quietly, while I felt nothing but numbness. The big day came a week later. I noted Walker's clothes and toys with boxes, while Ruby labeled everything as usual. The facility was listed items. No sharp objects, no electronics and internet access, no string of scores or 12 inches. We drove the 2 hours mostly in silence. Walker sat in the back playing with a puzzle cube, not looking out the window once. Pine Ridge looked like a cross between a school and a hospital. Locked doors with keypads, high fences, and cameras everywhere. But they tried to make it less scary with colorful murals and playground visible through reinforced windows. Walker's room was small but clean. A bed bolted to the floor, a dresser that couldn't tip over, a desk with rounded edges. I helped him arrange his things while a staff member watched. Walker organized everything methodically, grouping his clothes by color, lining up his books by size. He tested the mattress, checked the closet dimensions, examined the window bars. When we had to leave, he didn't ask when we'd visit or when we'd come home. He just waved and went back to organizing the shelves. Jane Hansen met with us before we left. She ran the behavioral program, kids like Walker for 15 years. She explained their system used clear consequences in order to teach folks
position here.
frequent choice points toward privileges. Every violation meant losing. She said Walker was smart enough to learn the system quickly. The goal wasn't to cure him, but to teach him to function safely in society. Our first week without Walker at home felt completely wrong, but also weirdly peaceful. I kept walking past the room expecting to see him. But that never started changing almost immediately. We stopped checking behind doors before entering the room. Started sleeping through the night without waking up scared. She laughed at cartoons again and asked for second help. Her whole body seemed to relax in ways I hadn't realized she'd been tense. Ruby and I didn't talk much about how quiet the house felt. 3 days later, the phone rang during dinner. It was Jay calling from Pine Ridge, and Walker had gotten another kid in trouble for his mother's attack.
Didn't see that one coming.
The other boy was younger, and Walker had convinced him it would be a fun game to break the woman. So when staff caught up, Walker immediately blamed everything on Seth. Jay said they confronted Walker about manipulating him on the red. He didn't show any guilt or shame. Just seemed mad. She explained this was pretty common behavior for kids with this condition, and they'd be working on it as therapy, but I could tell she wasn't surprised at all. The next morning, Ruby told me she'd made an appointment with a therapist for herself because she needed help dealing with it. She found someone who specialized in parents of kids with behavioral problems. The first session was that, and she came back, her eyes were red and crying, but she seemed calm. She said the therapist helped her understand that Walker's brain was different from birth, and accepting that didn't mean she was giving up on him or being a bad mom. It meant she could stop blaming herself for not fixing something that wasn't fixing it the way we wanted it to be. 2 days later, we cut our first family therapy session of a video of Walker. We sat in a chair next to Dave while Ruby was holding on my laptop and switching pages. Walker answered all the questions with the right words, saying he was sorry for hurting Daniela, and understood why he needed to be at Pine Ridge. But there was no feeling behind any of it. James pointed out afterward that this was actually progress because he was learning what responses people expected, even if he didn't feel them naturally. She said for kids like Walker, learning to mimic appropriate emotions was sometimes the best outcome they could hope for. That night at bedtime, Daniela climbed into my lap and asked if Walker was sick. I struggled to find words a 4-year-old could understand and stopped scared. After a few tries, we settled on telling her that Walker's brain worked differently, and he needed special help to learn how to mistake with other people. She needed to accept it and ask if he would get better. I told her the doctors were helping him learn, but avoided making promises they couldn't keep. 3 weeks after Walker arrived at Pine Ridge, Jade called to say he'd earned his first privilege for following all the rules of the system. He got an extra 30 minutes of computer time each day for educational games. She said he seemed pleased when they told him, but it was hard to tell if he was actually happy, or just recognized he'd achieved a goal he'd been working toward. The whole conversation made me realize how much we analyze every tiny reaction from Walker, looking for signs of normal emotions that probably weren't there. That weekend, I was cleaning out Walker's room to turn it into a playroom for Danielle. I found his little league trophy from last year. He remembered shooting at his game. She would throw a curveball in the backyard. I looked forward to the dawn. I was teaching the project, watching him graduate, and dancing, playing. The future I pictured for my son has completely disappeared and been replaced with supervised visits and behavior charts. I sat on his bed holding that trophy and let myself feel the grief that the child thought I had. The next facility report came 2 days later that Walker was following every single rule perfectly and earning privileges faster than most residents. But they noted something concerning in their observation. He showed zero homesickness and never asked about coming home or when he could see us next. His only interest in family visits was that they were required to earn certain privileges. Other kids cried for their parents or got upset about being away from home. But Walker treated the facility like a puzzle to solve, not a place keeping him from his family. During our supervised visit, Walker handed me a card he made in art therapy. It had a drawing of our family and said, "I love you, Dad," in his neat handwriting. For a second, my heart jumped thinking maybe he was starting to feel something. But afterward, the art therapist pulled me aside. He confronted to make the card as part of the session, and just copied what another child wrote on theirs. She said he'd asked if making the card would earn him points toward his next privilege. 3 days later, Daniela started back at her regular preschool with a whole safety plan in place. Mrs. Henderson had assigned her a special buddy teacher who knew about the situation with Walker and would keep extra watch. Daniela was nervous at first, but she kept smiling and talking about playing with her friends. Seeing her start to be a normal predicament made everything else feel worth it, even though it hurt. That night, Ruby and I sat down with our bank statements and investment accounts to figure out how to pay for Walker's treatment. Insurance covered almost nothing for residential psychiatric care, and Pine Ridge cost more than most people's mortgage each month. We had to sell some stocks we'd been saving for the kids' college fund to catch out part of my 401 to take early, which meant huge bills. Financial stress on top of everything else made Ruby cry, but we didn't have any choice. The psychiatrist at Tanya called him 3 days later, saying Walker had admitted to the session that he still thought about hurting people every single day. He sat in her office describing these thoughts like he was talking about what he ate for breakfast. She wanted to increase his medication dose and had a mood stabilizer that might help with the impulses. I listened to her explain how Walker had drawn pictures of kids getting hurt, and when she asked why he did so, he just shrugged and said it was what he thought of it. The new medication made him tired and stressed, and the facility said he was sleeping 12 hours a night.
Oh, come on. This is just brutal. Hurling the bat through the air and connecting.
Rolling elbow finds its mark.
Ouch.
There's the setup. Here we go, Byron. Pedigree. I knew they didn't like each other, but I didn't think they'd turn this into a parking lot brawl.
6 weeks into treatment, they scheduled our first opinion test where Daniela was by video from Ruby while I was filling. Walker sat across from me in the therapy room watching the laptop screen and Daniela appeared holding his favorite stuffed animal. She immediately hid behind Ruby when she saw Walker's face on the screen. He watched that same blank look I'd seen so many times before, while the therapist tried to get them to interact. Daniela whispered something to Ruby about being scared, and Walker just tilted his head with a studying bugs. The therapist ended the video harder, 10 minutes, and Daniela started crying. That week, they started teaching Walker about emotions, scars, faces showing different feelings. Jade showed me how he'd memorized every single word perfectly.
Shoulders are
Being
down.
happy, sad, angry, scared, surprised.
Seth Rollins scores the
He asked me to
victory.
show her what it would be